For years, I was the family's fixer, the invisible thread holding everything together while everyone else spun their own stories around me. Bills paid on time, ideas drafted in the quiet hours, favors done without a single thank you. No one ever saw me as more than the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who just made sure the wheels kept turning without a hitch. I'm Julia Scott, 33, a freelance marketing strategist juggling deadlines and clients. But at every family gathering, I'm also the unpaid event planner, the one covering catering costs, cleaning up, smoothing over frayed nerves. Last Thanksgiving, I shelled out $200 for the catering with the promise that the family would split it equally. That check still hasn't been cashed by anyone but me. Meanwhile, Rachel, my older sister, floats through these same rooms basking in praise as the successful one, the charming face that everyone adores. She knows how to work a crowd, how to make herself the star, while I stay in the shadows. I'm tired, but I'm determined. I have a secret power, meticulous documentation of everything I've contributed, every dollar, every idea, every sleepless night. I keep all the emails, invoices, and notes tucked away because I've begun to sense something isn't right. At my niece's baby shower last month, I funded the decorations, the food, even the gifts. Yet, Rachel made the loud announcements, turned the spotlight on herself, and left me feeling invisible once again. It's a familiar ache, but I push it down. Recognition hasn't come yet, but I'm still holding on to hope. The roots of this dysfunction run deep. I flash back to when I was 16. I had this science project idea, innovative, detailed, something I had worked on for weeks. I was proud and eager to share it at the school fair, thinking it would finally be my moment. But Rachel swooped in, presenting my project as her own, effortlessly soaking up the accolades and praise. I remember the sting of watching her accept the applause while my protests were dismissed. Mom said, "Rachel has the charm. You have to learn to pick your battles." That phrase echoed in my head for years. Rachel was the golden child, naturally gifted with charisma and that effortless charm that made everyone love her. Meanwhile, I was the scapegoat, the one expected to sacrifice without question, to work behind the scenes and never speak up. I tried to rationalize it as family love, the kind that demanded I support, not lead. But the pattern was clear. Rachel got the spotlight, the favors, the praise, and I got the silent work. Even into adulthood, it didn't change. I loaned Rachel $15,000 for a side venture that flopped, and she never paid me back. I bit my tongue, convincing myself that someday my loyalty and sacrifices would be recognized. The resentment simmered quietly, buried beneath layers of patience and hope. 2 years ago, I took a risk. I launched a business concept, an online marketing platform for local artisans, something I believed in deeply. I invested $20,000 of my savings, hired freelancers, and spent countless nights drafting pitch decks and prototypes. Rachel acted supportive, smiling and nodding, but behind my back, she was cultivating relationships with the investors I had introduced to the family at gatherings. These contacts were the result of months of painstaking networking on my part, but Rachel knew how to charm and take credit. Mark, my husband, knows this side of me, the frustration, the exhaustion. He's my anchor, my confidant, always telling me to be patient, to stay strategic. My secret power, the detailed timestamps, the financial records, the emails, the sketches, everything is saved. I have proof of every wire transfer, every draft, every step I took. Yet Rachel publicly presented the business as her own, and in its first year, she pocketed $340,000. The family, including Mom, Ellen, celebrated Rachel's success without acknowledging me. Greg, our younger brother, stays mostly neutral, but is often swayed by Mom's biases and Rachel's charm. It's like I'm screaming underwater, visible yet unheard, indispensable yet invisible. The most crushing moment came at a local business expo. Rachel was officially launching the platform, and I was there to support her, or so I thought. Investors approached her, praising the idea, but then one asked about the original documents, the concept's origin. For a split second, I saw a flicker of panic in Rachel's eyes. I stepped forward, voice steady but heart pounding. Actually, I was the one who designed the initial framework. Rachel cut me off coldly. Julia's just here for moral support. The room went quiet. Industry peers and family alike noticed the dismissal. My heart sank as humiliation washed over me, sharp and public. I wanted to disappear. I told myself it was Rachel's insecurity, that I needed to be more assertive next time. But the seed of doubt planted itself deep inside. Could my own family truly side so openly against me? The internal conflict churned, but I held back from confrontation, sensing the stakes were higher than ever. I refused to be passive, yet fear kept my voice locked inside. For now, I sensed the shift almost immediately after I finally stood my ground. Rachel seemed to smell weakness and struck fast and hard, but with a venom so subtle it took me weeks to see it clearly. It began with whispers. Small comments slipped into conversations with family and mutual friends that painted me as jealous and unstable. "Julia's always been a bit dramatic," Ellen said one evening over dinner, her voice calm, but her eyes sharp. "You know how sensitive she gets when things don't go her way." I froze, the dinner laughter around me suddenly feeling cold and sharp. Rachel's version of events was spreading like wildfire, and the people I once trusted started to look at me as a liability, not a sister. Even Greg, usually silent and neutral, began avoiding my eyes, his posture stiff when we crossed paths. At work events, I noticed the distance too. Mark mentioned that some of his clients and contacts had begun sidestepping me, their smiles polite but thin. I felt like I was being erased, both socially and professionally, and the isolation stung worse than any outright insult. Rachel's flying monkeys, as I privately called them, family friends and distant relatives, were all suddenly on her side, parroting her carefully crafted narrative. When I confronted Rachel with what I was hearing, she just smiled that cold, calculating smile and said, "You're imagining things. Everyone loves me because I get results." The gaslighting was relentless. She insisted she had helped me with the idea, that without her charm and leadership, nothing would have happened. It was infuriating and exhausting to be doubted by those who should know the truth. The family gatherings, once places of reluctant comfort, had become battlegrounds. Ellen's dismissive remarks were the most painful, especially because I had always looked to her for at least some validation. Instead, she framed me as the problem, the one stirring conflict where none existed. Rachel's subtle manipulations worked like poison, seeping into the fabric of our relationships until I was the outsider. I found myself shrinking, staying quiet, afraid to speak up lest I provoke another wave of attacks. The weight of being misunderstood, betrayed, and isolated pressed down on my chest like a stone, and yet, beneath it all, a small spark of defiance remained. I wasn't going to disappear without a fight. I tried one last time to bridge the chasm before it became a canyon. I called for a family mediation, hoping that reason and evidence could cut through the fog of lies. Ellen and Greg agreed to come, and I prepared meticulously, laying out my case with calm clarity. I brought my emails, the dated prototypes, the wire transfers, every piece of the puzzle that proved my role in the business. "Rachel," I said, voice steady but heart raw, "I want us to acknowledge the truth here. This isn't about grudges, it's about fairness and family." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in Rachel's eyes, but then she smiled that practiced, disarming smile and said, "Julia, you're misunderstanding everything. This was a team effort. Maybe you feel left out, but the investors saw my leadership. Without me, none of this would have happened." Ellen jumped in, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Julia, you're creating drama where there is none. We're family. Can't we just let this go for the sake of peace?" Greg sat quietly, staring at the floor, unwilling or unable to intervene. Even the cousin mediating, someone with no legal expertise but good intentions, suggested I drop the issue for family harmony. I left that room feeling like I had been punched in the gut. My truth, painstakingly compiled and presented, was dismissed like a petty complaint. The divide wasn't just widening, it was becoming an abyss. I realized that my family wasn't just unwilling to see my pain. They were actively choosing sides. The hope for a peaceful resolution crumbled, replaced by a simmering resolve to find another way. The next family event shattered what little calm I had left. It was my niece's baby shower, and I had poured my heart and money into making it perfect. $3,500, every detail planned, from the floral arrangements to the gourmet catering, the personalized gifts carefully selected to celebrate the new life joining our family. I arrived early, putting final touches on the decorations and making sure everything was flawless. But as guests began to arrive, Rachel swooped in like a queen claiming her throne. She took the microphone, delivering a grand speech filled with self-congratulations and thanks to herself. She spoke of her leadership in organizing the event, turning every compliment toward her own reflection. When she mentioned my quiet role, the tone was mockingly dismissive, calling it background noise that no one really needed to hear. The laughter that followed stung sharply. Greg chuckled along with the rest, and Ellen's proud smile was a cruel punctuation to the scene. Rachel didn't stop there. She took the opportunity to bring up the business, subtly framing herself as the brave entrepreneur who had taken risks, while I was the wannabe who never quite stepped up. The room grew heavy with awkward glances and forced smiles. I felt naked, exposed in my own family, my efforts erased in front of those I cared about. Professional contacts who attended exchanged uncertain looks, their respect shifting away from me. The humiliation was not accidental. It was a calculated power play designed to cement Rachel's dominance and my invisibility. It was the moment I realized the stakes were higher than I had thought. This wasn't just about credit, it was about control, and I was losing. Desperation drove me to one final private confrontation with Rachel. I needed to know if there was any part of her that could see reason. "Rachel," I said quietly, "I need acknowledgement for what I've contributed. A fair share, not just of the money, but of the respect I deserve. This isn't about greed, it's about being seen and valued." Her eyes flickered with something like amusement before settling into cold disdain. "This ship has sailed, Julia. You lost your chance," she said flatly. My heart sank, the weight of her rejection more painful than I could have imagined. I turned to Mark, hoping for his support, my anchor in this storm. But Rachel was already working her subtle magic on him, painting me as bitter and difficult, someone whose bitterness was damaging relationships. Then came the threat that shattered any remaining illusions. Rachel warned that if I pushed further, she would expose my supposed unprofessionalism to the investors, the very people I had worked so hard to impress. It was a warning wrapped in menace, a clear line crossed from family drama into ruthless strategy. I was stunned, betrayed not only emotionally, but now facing calculated attacks that could destroy my career. The fragile trust I had clung to, the hope for reconciliation, crumbled completely. I stood at a crossroads, forced to face a brutal truth. The family I once believed in had turned its back on me, and I was left alone to fight for my worth. The night of that family dinner unfurled into a nightmare I couldn't escape. Ellen's voice cut through the room like a knife, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Julia, you're being disruptive again," she said, eyes scanning the table with that cold dismissiveness I knew all too well. "Maybe you need therapy to deal with these issues instead of dragging everyone down." The laughter that followed felt like shards of glass against my skin. Greg sat beside her, his eyes fixed on his plate, avoiding mine completely. I caught the subtle shift in his posture. The distance Rachel had woven between us was now a chasm. My heart clenched. Even Mark, who usually anchored me, seemed pulled by invisible strings, his expressions flickering between concern and hesitation. I wanted to speak up, to defend the years I had poured into that business and the family, but my voice felt drowned beneath the weight of their judgments. The friends I confided in began to edge away, unsure of what to believe amidst the swirling family drama. At work, the fallout was just as brutal. Clients called less frequently, emails went unanswered, and I overheard hushed conversations questioning my focus and reliability. The lines between personal and professional blurred painfully as I wrestled with the growing self-doubt. Had I overestimated my role? Was I clinging to illusions of importance in a family that had never truly seen me? The isolation crept in like a fog, suffocating and cold. I sat alone in our small apartment, the silence magnifying the ache in my chest. The proof, the emails, the wire transfers, the painstaking records of every contribution offered some solace, but even they felt fragile against the tide of betrayal. I replayed conversations, searching for moments where I might have been mistaken or too sensitive. The ache of invisibility deepened, threatening to swallow the woman who had fought so hard to be seen. Yet somewhere beneath the despair, something stubborn flickered, a quiet ember of resolve, a whisper that perhaps the truth still mattered. I wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. The breaking point came on an evening I never expected, during Greg's surprise birthday party. The house buzzed with laughter and chatter, but I found myself retreating to the kitchen, hoping for a moment of peace. That's when I overheard them, Rachel and Ellen, locked in a private conversation near the pantry. Rachel's voice was sharp, smug. With Julia out of the picture, the business and family have never been better. No more drama, no more debts. I own it all. I stood frozen, the words slicing through me like a blade. Ellen's laughter chimed in, warm and approving, confirming the betrayal. My hands clenched into fists as Rachel continued, her tone dripping with triumph. Minutes later, Rachel stood before the gathered family, raising her glass. "I've settled all debts related to the business," she declared, voice loud and clear. The implication was cruel. My financial support was nothing more than unpaid loans, debts that I had supposedly failed to repay. The room fell into stunned silence. Mark's eyes met mine, confusion and pain flickering there, but no defense came. I felt my dignity shatter piece by piece, crumbling under the weight of their disbelief. It was as if I was no longer Julia, the woman who had built dreams and sacrificed endlessly. I was just a problem to be erased. Something inside me snapped, a cold fury replacing years of hurt and hope. The invisible thread that once held me tethered to this family broke, and a fierce, silent vow took root. This betrayal would not stand. This ends now, on my terms. Alone in my room, the walls closing in, I sifted through the mountain of emails, bank statements, and contracts I had kept hidden away. Each document was a memory, a testament to the nights I spent drafting proposals while my family praised Rachel's leadership. I traced the timeline of every wire transfer I made, every idea I had shared, and the countless moments Rachel twisted into her own narrative. The anger rose steadily, a roaring tide fueled by years of being overlooked and weaponized. I remembered the countless times my kindness was turned into weakness, my loyalty exploited to silence me. This wasn't mere oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated assault on my worth. The clarity hit me with brutal force. The pattern was no accident. Rachel's charm was a mask for her manipulation, and Ellen's favoritism was the poison that spread it through the family. I wasn't crazy or overly sensitive. I was a victim of intentional exploitation, but I wasn't weak anymore. The woman who had sacrificed everything, who had been silenced and erased, was awakening. The thought echoed in my mind, steady and unyielding. I will never be invisible again. I will prove the truth. I will reclaim what is mine. The pain transformed into a weapon, sharpening my resolve and igniting a fire that refused to be extinguished. This time, I would fight not just to be heard, but to be seen and respected. That night, I reached out to Mark, my anchor in the storm, and laid everything bare. The betrayal, the evidence, the depths of my despair and newfound resolve. "I'm done waiting," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm going to expose everything, the truth about the business, the money, the lies." He looked at me with unwavering support, the warmth in his eyes a balm to my fractured spirit. "We'll do this together, step by step," he promised. We talked long into the night, crafting a plan centered on the financial audit I had meticulously preserved. Every transaction, every time-stamped email, every contract would be our weapon. This wasn't about vengeance, but justice, proportional, legally sound, and undeniable. The emotional weight lifted slightly as I began to organize the documentation, drafting formal letters and preparing to confront Rachel with facts that no amount of charm or manipulation could erase. My posture straightened, my voice strengthened by purpose. The shift was profound. No longer a victim trapped in the web of family deception, but a strategist ready to reclaim control. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by silence or sacrifice, but by clarity, power, and unwavering determination. The battlefield was set, and I was no longer invisible. I was ready to fight, with evidence, with courage, and with the unshakable truth as my shield. Mark and I sat side by side at our kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows over the mountain of papers spread between us: bank statements, legal filings, email threads, investor correspondence. I'd spent weeks gathering every shred of evidence I could find, but now it was time to analyze the patterns, to trace the tangled web Rachel had woven. What surprised me most was how deeply Rachel depended on me without even realizing it. The documents she used to secure credit lines, the investor decks she'd pitched, all bore my fingerprints, my initial drafts, and my financial backing. More than once, Mark pointed out, Rachel's filings referenced documents I had painstakingly created, yet she never had the originals when investors requested them. I called my financial advisor on a secure line, careful to keep everything confidential. Together, we reviewed my bank transfers, over $54,000 in loans and event expenses I had fronted, all traceable, all legitimate. I explained Rachel's pattern of dodging requests for original paperwork and how her reliance on Mark's social connections for networking left her exposed. It was unsettling to realize that Mark's inadvertent entanglement gave Rachel a fragile lifeline. Without his introductions and his backing, her facade might crumble faster. I began compiling an inventory of every transaction, every email where Rachel nervously asked me for help on investor pitches, but refused to publicly acknowledge my role. That refusal was her weakness and my strength. As I laid out each piece, a quiet fire grew inside me. This wasn't just about money or credit. It was about undeniable proof of my ownership and contributions, a secret power I'd never fully embraced before. I realized that the timestamps on my emails, the financial trails, and the witness accounts from freelance collaborators could form an ironclad platform to challenge Rachel's false claims. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the backbone Rachel leached from, and now I understood just how much she needed me, and how much I was ready to take back. Despite the storm brewing beneath my calm surface, I kept my demeanor steady. At the next family brunch, surrounded by the usual chatter and clinking coffee cups, I played my part perfectly. Ellen smiled thinly, Greg looked distracted, and Rachel flitted around the room, radiant and oblivious to the scrutiny gathering against her. I engaged Ellen and Greg in light conversation, carefully watching their reactions as I casually inquired about investor follow-ups. Rachel's response was a nervous deflection, a sign she hadn't anticipated my audit readiness. It was a small victory, but it confirmed that the cracks in her armor were widening. Behind the scenes, I was busy gathering witness statements from freelancers who had worked with us and former investors who had grown suspicious of Rachel's evasions. Every piece of testimony added weight to my case. I backed up my files in multiple secure locations and quietly changed passwords on shared accounts, cutting off Rachel's access without raising alarms. I discreetly informed my attorney, building a legal framework that would keep me protected. All the while, I maintained a mask of calm at family events, especially as the baby shower loomed, a gathering Rachel would never expect to become the setting for my reckoning. My silence was deliberate, a stark contrast to the emotional reactions I'd once shown. This was no longer about pleading or proving. It was about calculated, strategic action. The baby shower arrived with the usual mix of warmth and tension that had come to define our family gatherings. I held the microphone with steady hands, my voice soft but clear as I began my toast. I spoke of family, of dreams, and then, carefully, I unveiled the truth, documented proof of my ownership of the business idea, my financial contributions, and the timestamps that confirmed my early role. The room shifted. Rachel's confident mask faltered as unease flickered in her eyes. But the real shock came when Mark stepped forward, his voice steady, but laced with regret. He confessed that he and Rachel had secretly collaborated to undermine my efforts, manipulating investor communications and shaping family perceptions to their advantage. The weight of betrayal hit me like a freight train. Mark, my anchor, had been part of the deception all along. Rachel's carefully crafted two-faced persona crumbled in an instant, exposing the jealousy and sabotage she hid behind smiles. Ellen's face drained of color, her usual dismissiveness replaced by stunned silence. Greg looked between us, caught in the sudden whirlwind of truth. The room was electrified with shock and disbelief. I seized the moment, my voice calm but resolute. This isn't just about business. It's about truth, respect, and finally ending the lies. The betrayal's exposure changed everything. For the first time, I held both the moral and evidential high ground. The tide had turned, and the battle lines were now unmistakably drawn. In the days following the baby shower, I moved swiftly into action. I formally initiated a financial audit, notifying investors and business partners with clear, time-stamped evidence of my original idea and the funds I had invested. I severed any informal support I had previously extended, withdrawing Rachel's access to shared contacts, accounts, and digital resources. The impact was immediate. Investors demanded explanations Rachel couldn't provide, and her credit lines came under scrutiny as ownership became murky. Rachel stumbled, blindsided by the sudden pressure and unable to mount a coherent defense. The calm, calculated steps I took sent ripples through our shared network, shaking the shaky foundations Rachel had built. I kept my approach measured and professional, focused on reclaiming my stake and establishing clear boundaries, never stooping to personal attacks. Mark, exposed and silent, retreated from the spotlight, compounding the strain on Rachel. The first consequences of my strategic moves were clear. Rachel's house of cards was beginning to topple, and the family's fractured loyalties were being tested anew. The battle for my rightful place was underway, and I was no longer the invisible sister. I was a force poised to reclaim everything I had sacrificed for so long. The day of reckoning arrived on a crisp Saturday afternoon, the kind of light that slants through windows and sharpens every detail. I had invited the key players, family members, a few close friends, and several investors who had quietly supported my claims. The room was filled with a tense anticipation, the kind that prickles at the back of your neck when you know something important is about to unfold. Rachel sat across from me, the usual confident smile replaced by a flicker of unease beneath her polished exterior. Ellen hovered nearby, her eyes flickering between me and Rachel like a referee, unsure which side to support. Greg shuffled in late, avoiding eye contact, his usual detachment replaced by a reluctant curiosity. I began by laying out the evidence with deliberate precision. A thick binder held the chronological trail, emails time-stamped months before Rachel's supposed inception of the business idea, bank statements proving my loans, and detailed notes from freelancers who had worked with me directly. The room hushed as I methodically dismantled the narrative Rachel had spun for years. "The truth is here," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "I built this idea, I funded it, and I carried this family's financial burdens. Today, I set the record straight." Each piece of evidence I presented was a brick removed from the fortress of lies Rachel had constructed. Her face paled, the confident mask cracking as she stumbled for rebuttals that never came. The silence that followed was electric. Friends who had once nodded along with Rachel's version of events now looked at me with new eyes, their doubt palpable. Ellen, usually quick to dismiss, sat speechless, her usual sharp retorts swallowed by shock. Greg's expression shifted from avoidance to shame, his body language confessing more than words ever could. In that charged space, I laid down my boundaries clearly. No more unpaid labor, no more stolen credit, and a demand for formal acknowledgement and restitution. This wasn't a vendetta, it was justice. The weight of years of silence lifted as I reclaimed my dignity. The champagne moment was not in celebration, but in the quiet power of truth wielded with grace, a reversal not born of anger, but of undeniable clarity. Rachel's world began unraveling almost immediately. Investors, once swayed by her charm, sent formal inquiries demanding explanations. The funding that had propped up her ventures started to waver, with some even withdrawing their support outright. I watched as her carefully maintained facade crumbled under the pressure, her attempts at damage control falling embarrassingly short. She tried the old tactics, love-bombing family members with grand apologies and promises of change, but those gestures fell flat against the reality I had exposed. Ellen's allegiance, once unwavering, wavered as the truth settled like a cold dawn. Greg, caught in the middle for so long, started to distance himself further, no longer willing to be a pawn in Rachel's game. Desperation crept into Rachel's voice when she reached out to Mark and me, her messages pleading, her tone more vulnerable than I had ever heard. But the hard boundaries I had set were firm. Mark, grappling with his own remorse, began to confront the fallout within his circle, strained relationships exposing the depth of the betrayal. I watched all this unfold with a quiet satisfaction, not born of cruelty, but from the justice of consequence. The family dynamics shifted irrevocably, forced by the undeniable truth to reckon with their choices. My integrity, once invisible and dismissed, now shone unmistakably. This was no longer a battle of whispers behind closed doors. It was a reckoning, and it was mine to command. Rachel's tactics grew increasingly desperate and erratic. She enlisted mutual friends and relatives, those flying monkeys who had once championed her cause, to pressure me from every angle. Rumors began to spread, whisper campaigns aimed at undermining my character and credibility. I received threatening emails hinting at legal battles, with veiled accusations of defamation designed to intimidate me into silence. Friends who had once supported me wavered under the weight of social pressure, caught in the crossfire of a family war. But I was prepared. Every attack was met with calm, deliberate documentation. Each rumor was countered with facts. Every threat was logged and passed on to my legal counsel. I refused to be baited into petty disputes or emotional outbursts. Instead, I maintained a composed front, reinforcing my boundaries through formal channels and legal measures. Slowly, the influence of Rachel's flying monkeys waned as my circle of allies grew stronger, drawn by my unwavering resolve and the clarity of my truth. Rachel's isolation became complete, her credibility shattered beyond repair. The desperation in her final attempts only underscored the power shift that had taken place. Where once I had been the silenced one, now I was the unshakable force, turning chaos into control and manipulation into exposure. The battle was no longer about family politics. It was about reclaiming my life with dignity intact. Months later, I stood in my own bright, sunlit workspace, a place that felt like a sanctuary rather than a battleground. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new beginnings. Mark was by my side, our relationship rebuilt on transparency and mutual respect, stronger now for the trials we'd endured. Reflecting on the journey, I whispered to myself, I'm no longer the invisible sister or the family ATM. I'm a woman who knows her worth and demands respect. The formal acknowledgement from investors, coupled with a partial restitution agreement with Rachel, marked a new chapter. A reluctant peace forged from hard-won justice. Ellen's once unyielding favoritism softened as she witnessed my transformation and the tangible success I'd built on my own terms. Greg reached out with tentative apologies, signaling the fragile but hopeful start of healing. My boundaries, no unpaid labor, no stolen ideas, no silence, stood firm, the lines drawn with care and conviction. The memory of the baby shower lingered, bittersweet yet pivotal, a catalyst for the change that had redefined my life. My peace did not come from revenge, but from reclaiming my identity, rewriting my story with strength and grace. Now I mentor young women entrepreneurs, sharing the lessons I've learned about self-worth, resilience, and the power of documented truth. In this, I find my ultimate revenge and liberation, a future where my talents are celebrated on my own terms, and my voice is never again ignored.